The Pacers, in a rare Thursday night game, cruised past the Detroit Pistons in a game that they should win, but the Pacers haven't always won games that they should win this season. I'll talk about that at the end of the show. But before that, Michael Scotto, NBA insider for HoopsHype, who has been plugged in with the league for a long time, joins me to talk about the future of the Pacers, the direction they're headed, where this franchise could go next. We'll talk about that for 20 minutes before talking Pacers Pistons. All that today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to this Friday edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers as always. My name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the West Side Community News. And today, we are going to be joined by Michael Scotto from HoopsHype, NBA insider, has been for a very long time, to talk about the Pacers, what direction they might pick and go from here, what changes and tweaks they could make, where this franchise is headed in general. Scotto's been plugged in with the NBA for a long time. He provided a lot of very interesting insight in our 20-minute conversation. And then in our last segment, Pacers beat the Pistons in a game that they should win, but the Pacers have lost a lot of games they should win this season. So breaking down what happened in that game, how it went, how the Pacers were able to win a game without Malcolm Brogdon. Talk about why he's out or was out for this game as well. So lots to get to today. Let's just jump right in. Michael Scotto is going to join us right now on the Locked On Pacers podcast. We are now joined by Michael Scotto, NBA insider for HoopsHype, here to talk Pacers, their upcoming potential change of direction, the future of this franchise in general. He's been plugged in with the NBA for some time now, and he can provide more insight than I could ever provide about any team in the league. First of all, how you doing, sir?
Hey Tony, how you doing? I figured you'd get a kick out of that of the Brooklyn. How you doing? It's great to be on. I appreciate you having me stop by to talk a little Indiana Pacers with you.
I do love the Brooklyn accent. It is one of my favorite parts of the HoopsHype podcast. It's just the accent. I talked to Kane Pittman of Locked On Bucks earlier this week, and he has an Australian accent. I mean, I'm just flying through the podcast accent tour this week. It's been absolutely wonderful for me. So the big story in Indiana came out roughly a week ago, a little over that now, and there's been a lot of stuff that's happened since then, but they're considering a change in direction, whether the specifics is called a rebuild, a retool. Herb Simon, owner, coming out and saying, rebuild is probably the wrong word. They're still probably going to change direction. Myles Turner has come out and publicly requested a change in role. Were you surprised at all to hear that the Pacers were considering going down a different path?
No, Tony, I wasn't, because the Indiana Pacers haven't advanced past the first round of the playoffs since the 2013-14 season. And then after that, they missed the playoffs. And then they went on a run where they lost in the first round for 5 seasons in a row. And now they're on track to miss the playoffs completely for a second straight season. And, Rick Carlisle was brought in to help get the Pacers on track with the core they have. Make no mistake, Carlisle is expected to be involved in the decision-making process in Indiana after just signing a contract to become the team's coach. And, I just felt like, they'll tell you, I'm sure, in that locker room that they're underachieving from what they thought that they could be. They haven't had a healthy TJ Warren in a while. So I certainly think that has hurt them as well, and they've dealt with injuries, but who hasn't in this COVID era of the NBA? So they expected to do better, and they're not there. So you have to reevaluate things.
Yeah, I think every player on the team has at some point said something like, "Yeah, we think we're a playoff team, and we thought we'd be better at this point." And so many losses by one possession, and barely losing to the Warriors, and everyone's been hurt. Like, new coach, new system. There's a lot of reasons for this specific season. You could go, yeah, you know what? You're 12-17 right now. You listening, it's 2 days later. They have a different record now. But, it makes sense why their record is what it is. But at the same time, you already laid it out. No playoff success at all since Paul George left this franchise. There's a reason they need to change directions, because the core they've been going with since they drafted Myles Turner and built this team really hasn't been working. And maybe Warren can return and help that a little bit. But I don't think he can change them from a not even making the playoffs kind of team to one that has success at the levels they've been hoping for. And so far, that's not looking like the case, to the point that reports are coming out about this directional change. And I think Carlisle's role, like you just mentioned in this, is very interesting, because he wasn't a part of any of the decisions to bring in any of the guys they have now. He has his own way of playing. So seeing who they bring in and how it could fit what he's been trying to implement and do with this roster could be interesting, not only from a they need changes perspective, but from they need Carlisle guys perspective. They do not have the 3-point shooting that he needs to coach a team. So do you think the Pacers are making the right choice to make changes? I mean, that kind of plays into what we just said about their failures, but there's been some sort of pushback, especially from within the team, that like they don't need to rebuild necessarily. They can just retool and stay good on the fly. And some fans think that that's possible too. They have an all-star on the team in Sabonis, a really nice rookie in Duarte. What kind of things do you think they need to do?
Well, when you look at the Indiana Pacers, Tony, I mean, first off, I don't think you can count on TJ Warren at this point, given all the setbacks he's had. And it's unfortunate because he was one of their best scorers, especially in the bubble when he was playing at his best. So, are they making like the right choice to make changes? Well, Myles Turner only has one more year after the season on his contract, and Domantas Sabonis has already been a two-time All-Star. So from my perspective, I don't see the value for either of those guys getting higher than what it is now. They absolutely need to see what the market has to offer because they're not good enough at this point. Otherwise, I touched on TJ Warren. He hasn't been able to come back, which hasn't helped. But because you can't bank on him necessarily going forward, given the setbacks he's had anyway, that's also going to play a factor in Indiana. I'll say this, Tony. In some ways, I was a little surprised that Malcolm Brogdon got an extension that made him ineligible to be traded. I won't go into the cap specifics on that. But there's plenty of Twitter capologists out there that can explain it. But the point is, he can't be traded now. I was a little surprised at that because I thought, Tony, looking at the Ben Simmons talks previously, where it was Malcolm Brogdon and possibly Caris LeVert for Ben Simmons. In my opinion, I know that wasn't necessarily the quote-unquote all-star that Philadelphia was looking for in return for Ben Simmons, but I thought on paper that wasn't, and there had to be other pieces involved for cap stuff, but that being the focus of a trade, I thought that would have been really interesting for both sides because you would have had Brogdon going to Philly as a good floor general and a guy who could spread the floor around Embiid. Caris LeVert can cut to the rim and is a good defender. And then Ben Simmons going to Indiana, you kind of shake things up a little bit, and you talk about having that big front court with Sabonis and with Turner. Defensively, Myles Turner and Ben Simmons, I thought would have been a terrific fit when you look at them defensively and getting up and down the floor. Turner could spread the floor. I would have been curious to see what that would have looked like ultimately if it went that route. But I do think they're making ultimately the right choice to consider making these changes because again, they're stuck in this neutral no man's land in the NBA. That's ultimately where you don't want to be. You don't want to be not good enough to be a playoff contender, and you don't want to be not bad enough to get a high lottery pick that could potentially change your franchise. Now, sure, they got Paul George. I think it was just outside the top 10 when he was drafted, or somewhere around there. And there are diamonds in the rough out there, but ideally, and normally you're getting a franchise guy at the top of the draft, which Indiana hasn't been in a very long time.
Yeah, I agree with you about basically everything you just said. The Brogdon extension in the context of everything now is fascinating because, they did it at the very deadline. They could have extended him, whereas if they just did it 3 or 4 weeks earlier, they could have legally traded him before the deadline this season, right? Which kind of would change the whole discussion of who they could move because in my head, when I keep saying retool, a part of that reason is because they can't trade Brogdon this year, right? So he'll be a part of their team no matter what direction they decide to go. They're not just going to bench him. So that's an interesting factor in all of this as well. And it's funny you mentioned that, they can't win a playoff series, but they never try to be bad because the guy who coined the term treadmill of mediocrity is running this team and making the decisions as they continue to go down this path and not haven't changed anything from their core that they've been having since basically they acquired Brogdon in the summer of 2019. So it'll be interesting to see what they kind of do. The word that was used to describe their next steps in the Athletics headline was rebuild specifically. And I've been kind of saying retool makes more sense to me, given the history of the Pacers. Like you said, they never pick inside, or they haven't picked inside the top 10 for a long time. And Duarte is young and interesting. They can't trade Brogdon this year. They have 2 interesting centers. Perhaps they could only have 1. I've been using retool because there's a lot of facts that suggests that. Given what you have maybe heard or know about this team, where do you kind of feel like they're going to go? Do you feel like they'll go a rebuilding route where they sink down a little bit for a few years? Do you think they're going to try to toe that middle line and retool on the fly like their owner, Herb Simon, told us all today?
Tony, I think they're going to toe the line and retool because they've never really gone all in on a rebuild and certainly not tanked. I don't expect them to do that now, especially after just hiring a veteran coach that's a winner in Rick Carlisle. He didn't. I never got the impression that Rick Carlisle came to Indiana to do a rebuild. He's older. I never saw him as a player development kind of guy. I feel like he's a guy that takes good players and makes them better and playoff contenders, like he did with Detroit. Tried to do with Dallas for a lot of times and got them to a championship and won. The roster also, like I said, it's not bad enough to rebuild and tank. They're not good enough to contend. To me, Tony, I'm curious what you think of this comparison, but they remind me somewhat of the Orlando Magic last season because if they did a fire sale, theoretically, they could get a lot back for their starters. And I think when you're kind of stuck in neutral as an organization, you need to decide what direction you're going to go. I don't think retooling is going to make them that much better. I mean, how many more years are they going to trot out the Sabonis and Turner front court? I think they kind of have to pick between them. I touched on it a little bit earlier. Neither of their value, in my opinion, is going to get higher going forward. You know what you're getting in Sabonis. He's a proven two-time All-Star. You know what you're getting in Myles Turner. The longer you wait to trade him and his contract is coming up closer to free agency, the less value he's going to have. So I think that's got to be your first decision there. They drafted Goga Batadze. I believe that's how you pronounce his name.
Correct.
So, you had him and you thought that he could be potentially your center of the future to pair with Domantas Sabonis. We haven't seen that yet. Haven't seen much development there. You touched on Chris Duarte. Chris Duarte, while he's a rookie, he's an older rookie too. He's not a spring chicken. So I also just wonder, I just don't know, like, if Domantas Sabonis is your best player, who ultimately I think that is their best player on the team, how far can he take you? And I just feel like, they've tried different ways. They tried it with Nick McMillan to go big, and it hasn't proven to be what they thought it would be. I know they haven't done it, but I don't think taking a page out of the Orlando Magic playbook and going full rebuild would be a bad thing for them. I think the attendance in Indiana would be fine either way. They have a loyal fan base, kind of like when the Knicks were bad for years. You didn't see their attendance tank. I don't think that would be a problem. So from an ownership perspective, I don't see why you wouldn't maybe give that a try. I mean, you've done it this way for so long, and it's netted very meh kind of results. So I don't know. To me, I would look to switch it up personally and really try something unique and different if they feel comfortable with their drafting strategy. They like Chris Duarte so much. Chad Buchanan was a guy who, when he was in Portland, found CJ McCollum as part of that management. So clearly you've got guys that have an eye for talent. So why not play into that more?
Hey, everybody, quick little break to talk about the good folks over at TrueBill, because you know why? Free trials renew without your consent. It's a business scam that is out to get you. Do not let greedy corporations pocket your money. Download TrueBill to take control of your subscriptions. TrueBill is the new app that helps you identify and stop paying for subscriptions you don't need, want, or simply forgot about. On average, people save up to $720 per year with TrueBill because companies make subscriptions hard to cancel. TrueBill makes it super simple. Link your accounts. TrueBill will cancel your unwanted subscriptions in one tap, and your TrueBill concierge is there when you need them to cancel unwanted subscriptions, so you don't have to. They have over 2 million users and have helped them save over $100 million. Don't fall for subscription scams. Start canceling today at TrueBill.com/LockedOnNBA. Go right now. TrueBill.com/LockedOnNBA could save you thousands a year. TrueBill.com/LockedOnNBA. That all makes sense to me. The Magic comparison I've seen made a few times, I've heard said in a few places as well. And the interesting thing about that is, if I remember correctly, I could be a little off here, but the Magic were kind of heading into the deadline last year, kind of thinking what what I've said about the Pacers, that they were going to deal a few of their vets, but not all of them, right? And kind of try to toe that line like we've talked about a little bit today, where they have some of their really good players stick around and some of, we got Isaac, we got Fultz, we get a couple more picks, and we'll just roll out with that. And then at the 11th hour, they're like, just kidding. We traded everybody, Fournier to Boston and Gordon went to Denver. And obviously Vucevic, that was the really surprising one, went to Chicago. So that would be, seems like if the Pacers went that route, not the craziest thing ever. The Magic seem to have an awesome little treasure trove of assets now, but that does not match the history of the Pacers at all, or how Simon has suggested he will build the team going forward, nor how he wants to watch his team going forward. And whether what he wants to do is the best thing for the team is a different discussion. But I kind of think the Magic comparison is pretty good. They were the 8 seed or 7 seed 2 years in a row too before they did all that, and that's kind of where the Pacers hovered last year. They finished 9th before the play-in tournament, so we'll see where that shakes out. I think that was all a good way to put it. I still think retool is going to end up being the right word for what they do. It sounds like it'll be one of the bigs, and LeVert and probably Jeremy Lamb are the guys that will be the most in trade talks. I don't know if you agree with all those names, but that's kind of where I get the sense they'll go. So do you have a guy you think will be the most likely to be moved of everybody beyond the centers? Because I think everybody's kind of figured out that one of them is going to go.
I definitely have my thoughts on Myles Turner being the guy. I would say two guys, when you posed that question to me, came to my mind. Myles Turner and Jeremy Lamb are the two guys I think are worth monitoring the most when it comes to Indiana making a trade. Turner only has one more year on his deal after this year, and Jeremy Lamb's in the final year of his contract. I don't see him as part of the long-term future. You might as well sell him off maybe to a playoff team and get a pick for him or something, or maybe a reclamation project that you can maybe see if you can develop in Indiana for more of a win-now team. Turner, he's one of the league's top defensive centers. He could stretch the floor, so he should have decent value. The biggest thing with him is Rick Carlisle has played him sporadically at times, and scouts and executives I've spoken to have taken notice of that, and it's led them to question if this is finally the year that he gets traded after hearing his name mentioned in trades for 3 seasons. And he even touched on that in a podcast with me on the HoopsHype podcast. And he's talked about, as you touched on as well earlier in this episode, of looking for a bigger role for himself. Myles has always felt like he can do more. Defensively, he's become an elite player. I do think offensively he's got room to take his scoring to maybe 16 points a game, 18 points a game with more shots, and becoming more of a focal point. I always thought when Charlotte was looking at a center this past offseason and they ended up with Mason Plumlee, I thought Myles Turner for them would have been perfect from a defensive standpoint, fitting with that young core. And I just think that for him, he's going to make a lot of money coming up. I think you could see him getting a pay increase from what he's making now. So Indiana also has to decide if they're willing to pony up for that. And then, eventually you're going to have the option where you can extend Sabonis as well. They've got to factor in all these things given the market that they're in. The other scenario when you look at those guys, they acquired Sabonis, but Myles was the hometown guy. I feel like in a market like Indiana, they would do well drafting guys. And I feel like this for a lot of, I don't know if I want to call Indiana necessarily a quote unquote smaller market, but there's not like a major free agency destination. So usually like through the draft, that's where you're going. So I just feel like, again, like, you touched on like LeVert, if they, looking at guys that maybe they can offload. I'll say this, if anybody knows what his medical situation is that maybe could be a concern down the line, it would be Indiana. And if I was a team that's going to trade or consider trading for LeVert, I would see if I have friends in Brooklyn's front office and do some background and due diligence on that. And obviously talk to Indiana as well. But I think that's something that kind of needs to be mentioned. And, he's had other injuries outside of, his physical condition as well. So you got a lot of factors in Indiana that need to be juggled. I think, the Nate Bjorkgren coaching hire did not go well. It blew up in their face. And, Rick was their way of salvaging. Essentially, getting Rick Carlisle was their way of finding out sooner than later if this team as constructed was good or not. The whole retool versus rebuild thing is going to be interesting. But I will say this: if they don't make any moves, I would be a little. I don't know if I want to say disappointed, but it's like, then what are you doing at that point? You're just going to continue to tread water. Like I think they really need to. I'll say this: all the other teams around the league I talk to with executives are focused on them as that team that could be a seller. Because the second they were losing earlier in the year, they were waiting for them to hit the panic button, and then the report came out from the Athletic that you touched on. There had been whispers about it, but you know how it is. The second a report gets out there and
Boom.
it's in the public space, then the phones start lighting up. And that's also another thing I find interesting. Sometimes, and I'm not saying Indiana did this, but sometimes teams could either leak that to get more calls and drive up the interest and the price. So I'm very curious to see what Kevin Pritchard, Chad Buchanan, and those guys do. I thought his comments about having a real star and needing a real star were interesting because you got a two-time All-Star in Domantas Sabonis, and I'm sure that didn't rub him the right way. And that's kind of your guy right now. And if you're saying you need a real star, you're inherently downgrading him. And if you're looking at trading him, you would want his value higher. It's almost like when Doc Rivers was calling out Ben Simmons. Like, why are you calling out the guy that, even if behind the scenes you want to move him, I wouldn't even do anything negatively to impact his stock. Everything is positive and sunshine and rainbows. And then when you move him after, we did it. Like that's the vibe you want, like in the front office. You talk to any of these guys, everybody's sunshine and rainbows, a terrific guy. And then when they move them behind the scenes after, you hear after, oh, well, it wasn't coming to practice, this, that. It's quite an interesting set of dominoes there, Tony. And I mean, you're going to have fun because they're going to have a busy couple of months coming up, I suspect.
I think so too. And KP even had to go on Twitter to discuss that real star comment, saying he apologized to the team and had to talk to them because of how it rubbed players. And he said, it was one of those things that just slipped up in a long interview. But even then, I think it was more pointed towards like they can't win at the end of games without a guy like that, and they've been terrible at the end of close games this season. But it certainly rings true to me that they don't have like a real star, depending on where you do the cutoff for stars. But it's very fascinating to see something like that come from a president, and then the ensuing fallout via tweets. And I agree with you that I think that this will be a busier couple months for the Pacers. They have not in the Pritchard era, outside of the Oladipo trade, which they only really did because they got in on the Harden stuff, been a mid-season trade team. So I'll be fascinated to see how they can make moves mid-season if they do, and what that looks like, because 12-17 start after missing the playoffs and being under 500 suggests it could happen, but the history of the Pacers makes it very hard to see exactly what could happen. Mr. Scotto, thank you so much for the time. Where can people follow you and all your great work?
Thanks, Tony. I appreciate it. It was fun to chat with you about Pacers and just in general. Find me on Twitter at Mike A. Scotto, Scotto, like the lotto. And obviously go to HoopsHype.com. A couple things had up recently. Had a nice one-on-one chat with Cole Anthony. He's a character. He's a very funny interview. I highly recommend people check him out. They will find plenty of laughs in there. We did a story, a national story on how how executives deal with players that are out of shape behind the scenes. I thought that was fascinating to see kind of who delivers the message, what resources they're looking to use. So if you ever want a little insight on that, it was a fun topic to dig in on and write about. And last but not least, on the latest edition of the HoopsHype podcast, touched a little bit on some Ben Simmons trade talks and how the Pelicans had looked to discuss trading potential future first-round picks and pick swaps for Ben Simmons, and had Jake Fisher on as well from Bleacher Report. And we kind of ran around the league a little bit. It was fun to do that with him. So everyone be sure to check that out.
I am an avid HoopsHype listener and reader because it's literally everything I think that is possible to have information on in the league is on HoopsHype somewhere. So highly recommend for those looking for an NBA resource that has everything in one place. One more break to talk to you guys about two more great groups of people. And first up is the good folks over at Built Bar, who are making the best tasting protein bars ever. They're the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar or even better than a candy bar. They're filled with so much holiday goodness and rich with decadent flavor and 100% covered in chocolate, amazingly low in calories, sugar, net carbs, and fat, but still high in protein. So many good flavors. I love the peanut butter brownie. The double chocolate's great. The cookies and cream is great. It'll give you that extra fuel you need around the busy holiday season. So many good flavors. You got to try them all. So many Locked On Pacers listeners have tried them and told me they absolutely love them. So many great flavors, and they're great for the health-conscious guy. You can use them as a meal substitute or a snack, whatever you prefer. Just try them out. Go to Built.com. Use the promo code LOCKED15. You'll get 15% off your order. That promo code again is LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. And let's also talk about BetOnline.ag, who have you covered all season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before as football season continues. The march to the playoffs, big Colts game tomorrow. BetOnline remains your number one spot for all the sports action this season. Head over to their new updated desktop or mobile website to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use our promo code LOCKEDON, all one word, to receive your bonus. Basketball, football, NHL, boxing, UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the game starts. The Pacers won an actual game, and that is the purpose of a basketball podcast, after all, to talk about a basketball team playing basketball games. Let's talk about Pacers Pistons and why a win is still a win for this Pacers team. Thank you, of course, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen every day, where we break down this maddeningly inconsistent basketball team. The Pacers beat the Pistons 122-113. It finishes with a 9-point spread. It was not that close. Pacers were up 15 in the fourth, kind of coasted at the end. Some weird free throws and fouls by the Pistons in the final seconds. Whatever, they won. And this game was strange at first, after what happened last night to the Pacers and on a back-to-back, a travel back-to-back nonetheless. This game looked like right away it could go very, very wrong for the Pacers. They were down 10 extremely early. It was 12-2 Pistons in like 3 minutes. It looked horrible. The Pacers did not throw the first punch, but Lloyd Pierce calls a timeout and extremely flips the game. They wanted to attack the Pistons' pressure, is something he said this game, and the Pistons were pressing early, full court pressing early in this game. They were without Dwayne Casey. They had an assistant coach, Rex. I forget how to pronounce his last name, coaching. So they were pressing early. Pacers couldn't figure it out, but once they called this timeout and kind of regrouped, all Pacers the rest of the way. I mean, if you take out that 10-point lead from the Pistons early, the Pacers basically dominated the final 45 minutes of this game by 20 to 25 points the whole way. They cruised. They absolutely cruised in this game. And they should beat the Pistons, right? This should not be some celebrated thing by this team. But this team all season long has proven that every win is a monumental occasion. They just lost to a Bucks team without several of their best players, right? That Bucks team is certainly a little bit better than the Pistons, but not that much, right? The Nuggets without Jokic, Murray, and Porter, not that much better than this Pistons team we saw tonight, right? You could do this example. They lost to the Pistons earlier this season. Why do I need to come up with other examples, right? This Pacers team, clearly it should be better than they are, but they're not. So even a win over the Pistons, a team they should beat, is something that this team needs to almost celebrate, because they cannot win games this year. They're not a particularly awesome team at this juncture. So any win is an important win, especially one on the second night of a back-to-back. So what happened? What actually happened in the game? Well, before it started is where the story of this game starts. Malcolm Brogdon announced his out with Achilles soreness before the game even starts. Brogdon did go through walkthrough today, but he was in some pain. He actually called the coaching staff to say he had the soreness. Lloyd Pierce, who probably has coached his last game as a head coach of the Pacers with Rick Carlisle out, said that all that about Brogdon, and then he reported his own symptoms, and that reporting his own symptoms sounds way different in the COVID era. Reported his own injury to the coaching staff. And speaking of Pierce, he said that Carlisle is expected to return this weekend, Sunday-ish. So Pierce probably done coaching the Pacers. He went 2-2, only lost to the Bucks and Warriors. If you zoom out, that sounds kind of good. They still should have won that Bucks game. Either way, that was one story to start the game. The other one was Justin Holiday, just his second game back, moves into the starting five. Chris Duarte likes starting more than coming off the bench. He'll be the first to admit that. But, he went to the bench, and I think with Brogdon out and McConnell out, that made sense tactically. Beyond just Justin Holiday doesn't need the ball as much, put him with the starting five. Duarte can get more touches with the second unit. So sure, it's something he doesn't like as much, but it does help him a little bit. But that kind of dictated the game, because with Justin Holiday in the starting five, Karis LeVert could have the ball a little bit more, and him and Sabonis were the guys the Pacers need to play through. And lo and behold, that worked fantastically. LeVert, far and away his best game of the season, his first time over 30 points this season. He had no trouble at all getting to his spots. 31 points on only 18 shots, got to the line 9 times, 5 assists, right? He had to fill in as the faux backup point guard with Brogdon out. And They didn't play anyone except for Wanamaker right at that one spot. So LeVert was effectively the backup point guard. He did a wonderful job. Wonderful job, right? They were only +1 in his minutes, but a lesser player or a lesser performance, and those minutes go very poorly. So he was able to guide the Pacers in a way they really needed. With Brogdon out, they needed someone who could really handle the ball and set guys up. LeVert did a fantastic job. Easily his best game of the season. To me, he credited the opportunity with Brogdon out after the game as being really key for him in this one. So that was a big part of it. And then Sabonis was excellent as well. Despite a not gaudy stat line, he was still very good. He had 12 points, 9 rebounds, and 6 assists, but the Pacers just thumped the Pistons in his minutes because the 6 assists were big. I mean, he was able to kick out a lot. Justin Holiday after the game talked about Sabonis looking out for shooters when you catch it inside, and Sabonis was just too big for a lot of the Pistons defenders on the interior, right? Isaiah Stewart's a decent defender, pretty springy, but doesn't really have the wherewithal to defend Sabonis yet at this stage of his career, and no one else could defend the paint at all for this Pistons team. So they really struggled to defend when Sabonis was in the game. That opened up the court for everybody else, and why Sabonis was a +5 for the Pacers. The bench was really big for the Pacers in this game, though, and that's why I get why Duarte wants to start, right? He wants to be announced. He likes to play with that unit. He feels like he's playing against the best players. The way he is, just it makes sense why he's like that. He's super competitive. He doesn't like to take off days. But when he's with the second unit, he can have the ball more. He can drive a little more, draw some pressure, make that second unit really click. And that kind of happened in this game. He wasn't like amazing or anything, but certainly his best game of the last 3 he's played. He finished with 15 points and 4 assists and 9 rebounds, right? So he can say that he should start, and talent-wise, maybe he should, and for the future of the Pacers, that might make some sense. But if he can play 29 minutes still off the bench and have a game like that, yeah, it makes sense. Plus 18 in those minutes. The Pacers did extremely well with their second unit. Duarte was a big part of that. O'Shea Brissett continues to be unbelievable in his recent stretches. Only 9 points for him, but just the energy guy providing all the stuff the Pacers need. The bench was really excellent. And speaking of the bench, forgot to include this earlier. Another shakeup in the rotation, despite Brogdon being out and Justin Holiday starting. That wasn't even all of it. Keelan Martin out of the rotation in this game. He had just been shooting poorly for a while. I think this makes a lot of sense, right? His hot start, right, when he entered the rotation under Carlisle, it made sense to keep playing him, and he rode that for a while. His defense is solid enough, but he stopped shooting very well, frankly, a while ago. In the month of December, Keelan Martin averaging under 6 points a game, shooting 44.7% from the field. Not as bad as it sounds, but that's a lot of carried from 2 games above 50%. None of the rest of his games above 50%. So it made sense to me to go to Torrey Craig, who is about as efficient of a player, but is a better defender. They go back to Craig in this game as he's back. Torrey Craig plays 12 minutes, and they were fine. So the bench was excellent. Sabonis and LeVert were excellent. No one else really needed to be good. The Pistons aren't very good, but Turner was excellent on defense in this game. 4 blocks. He also contributed 16 points without hitting a single 3, by the way. He was 7 for 8 on 2-pointers. So Myles Turner attacking very well in this game. Had a nice dunk. And right, this is the kind of game that he talks about when he talks about wanting a more clarified or bigger role, is these games where he can make a few more decisions with the ball. He did a good job with it against a Pistons team lacking a rim protector. And then Justin Holiday, like I talked about earlier, comes into the starting 5. It's his second game back from over 10 days off in health and safety protocols. 15 shots, tied for the most he's taken all season. He joked after the game and said, "Where were all these shots when I was in perfect rhythm?" He still finished with 17 points, hit 3 big threes, had probably the best dunk he's had as a Pacer with his left hand. James Boyd from the Indy Star was asking him a bunch of fascinating questions about that after the game, and Justin Holiday talking about the competitive spirit he had with his brothers growing up. So Wanamaker did fine, I suppose, filling in as a starting point guard. Didn't do a whole lot. I mean, he was nominally the point guard, but he was really just taking it up and giving it to Sabonis or LeVert or someone else to create. He was fine, whatever. 6 points, 3 assists, only 1 turnover. That's basically all you want from him in 25 minutes, since turnovers were such a big problem for him earlier in the season. So the Pacers should beat the Pistons. The story of this game is them actually doing it for once, because there's a lot of teams they should beat that they've played recently that they haven't. And another thing that I've been harping on, when they get into the paint and really focus on it the whole game, they don't have lapses in that thinking. They play their best. Lo and behold, 68 points in the paint tonight, a ton for the Pacers. Combine that with 25 free throws, which generally come on getting fouled on drives. That's 93 points. That's not a perfect science. You know, some of those free throws are from being in the bonus and things like that. But driving to the basket, getting their feet in the paint, huge for this Pacers team. They need to continue to have that be their offensive identity. And sometimes they just randomly go away from it. It kills them. That was not the case in this game. Excellent, thorough performance outside of the first 3 minutes where they looked, I mean, that looked like it could have been a turning point of the season for a few seconds where you're like, wow, if they lose to the Pistons and decimated Bucks on a back-to-back amid all these rumors and 5 days off coming up. That could really turn their season. But they looked awesome, frankly, for the last 40 minutes of this game. So good win. And like I just mentioned, big opportunity for this Pacers team coming up. 5 days off. That's so rare, even in non-condensed, non-COVID seasons, whatever. 5 days off in a row is crazy. Look, Karis LeVert said after the game, he doesn't know if he's ever, besides the All-Star break, had that long in between games off in a row in the season. And we heard from a lot of players that it's a good, and Lloyd Pierce really, that it's a good rest weekend, but also important that they try to find a way to keep their rhythm, right? They'll for sure have Friday off after a back-to-back. Maybe they'll have some of Saturday off. It sounds like it'll be a day where they can come in for like weightlifting and stuff, but not a practice day. So for the team that's played a ton of games this season, I believe the Pacers are still first in the NBA in games played, or at least close to it. 5 days off is massively important. Not to say that they'll come out with a ton of energy or a renewed anything, but to have this is such a blessing because teams don't normally have this sort of thing. Yeah, 30 games that they had played prior to tonight was tied for the most, but none of the other teams with 30, which is the Pelicans, the Cavs, the Bucks, and the Hornets played tonight. So as of right now, the Pacers are the only team that have played 31 games. This 5 days off will be really helpful for them. They've been banged up a lot, and it doesn't seem like anyone who was out in this game since Brogdon will just magically return after 5 days are over. TJ will probably continue to be out for a long time, but just like all these guys who have been banged up through the course of the season, this is a good get-right weekend for them, and it's just a good opportunity for a team that doesn't normally have something like this. So they got to make sure they keep their rhythm and don't get too out of it, but 5 days off should be a big boon for this team as they head into the Heat next Tuesday. So that's it. Big win. Now they can have some nice spirits on these 5 days off and can spend most of it in their home state as well, in their own bed, which will be good for this team. So that's it for today's show. Pacers needed this win and they got it. Thank you guys a ton for listening. Monday, thinking about doing a mailbag because they have so much time off and I don't have to do a topic based on a game or a player. So if you have questions about this team or anything like that, hit me up on Twitter at TEastNBA or the show at Locked On Pacers. We'll answer them on next Monday's show. Thank you guys so much for listening. Have a great day, and we will see you soon.